I want to tell you something before we begin. I grew up 20 minutes from this forest. I played near its edges as a child. My grandmother warned me about it before she warned me about cars or strangers or anything else a child should fear. She never told me why. Nobody did. That's the thing about certain places. The warning isn't the story. The warning is the whole point. Some places don't need an explanation. The explanation would almost make it worse. There's a stretch of forest in the foothills southeast of Berchtesgaden, in the Bavarian Alps, that the people of the surrounding villages have avoided for over 60 years. Not because of a sign, not because of a fence, not because anyone told them not to go, simply because they don't. And they've never felt the need to explain it further than that. Let me give you a picture of where we are. Berchtesgaden is a small mountain town in the very southeast corner of Germany, so far south and east that Austria wraps around it on three sides. It sits deep in the Berchtesgadener Land, a region of dramatic peaks, glacial lakes, and valleys that feel like the world forgot to finish them. The mountains here are not gentle. They are jagged and vertical and permanent in a way that makes you feel very clearly like a guest. The forest I'm talking about sits on the slope between two of those valleys. It has no official name, or rather, it appears on maps under a designation that nobody local ever uses. The older residents call it simply the Waldstück, the piece of forest, not the dark forest, not the cursed forest, not even the old forest, just the piece. As if naming anything more specific would be inviting something. The trees are mostly Norway spruce, dense close together, the kind that block out almost all light even in summer. The undergrowth is thick with fern and moss and the particular smell of cold wet earth that clings to everything in the alpine forests. From the road it looks completely ordinary, unremarkable. A patch of trees like 100 other patches of trees in this region. Except that the trails which lead into it stop at the tree line. Not because the path becomes difficult, not because the terrain changes, they simply stop. The grass ends, the dirt path ends, and the trees begin, and nobody has cleared a way further in. Not in living memory, possibly not ever. I first heard about the Waldstück when I was 7 years old. My grandmother, Oma Hilde, we called her, was not a superstitious woman. She was practical, sharp, unsentimental in the way that women of her generation often were. She had survived the war. She had rebuilt a life from almost nothing in the years that followed. She did not believe in nonsense, but she believed in this. We were walking around the valley road one evening, the two of us, when I spotted the tree line and started to run toward it, in a way that children run toward any unfamiliar thing. She caught my arm. She didn't shout. She didn't panic. She simply said quietly, "Nicht da," not there. And she turned me around and walked me home without any word. Later, when I was older, I tried to ask her about it. She told me that some places simply weren't meant for people, that the forest had always been that way, that her mother said the same thing, and her mother before that. She said, "You know how you can feel when a room changes? When you walk in and something is wrong, even if nothing looks wrong. It's like that, except it never stops." Then she changed the subject and didn't bring it up again. I've spoken to others who grew up in that area. The pattern is the same, almost without exception. Nobody has a dramatic story. Nobody describes a special event. Nobody can point to a moment when the forest became a place to avoid. It simply always has been. The avoidance predates anyone's memory. It predates the stories they were told. It feels like less a warning passed down through the generations and more like a piece of knowledge that was always already there, embedded in the landscape itself. One man I spoke to, a farmer in his 60s, who has worked land adjacent to the forest his entire life, described it like this. You don't feel watched. It's not like that. It's more like you feel considered, like something is deciding what to do with you. And you very much don't want to be there when it decides. He never had entered the forest, not once, in 60 years of working land 50 meters from its edge. He said it very matter-of-factly, the way you might mention that you never eaten a particular food, just never had a reason to, never felt like the right thing to do. I want to be precise about what I can and cannot verify. There are no documented disappearances linked to this forest, no official incidents on record, no police reports, no search and rescue operations, nothing that would show up in a newspaper archive. What there are gaps. Parish records from the villages nearest to the forest show up an unusual pattern of avoidance going back to at least the mid-19th century. There are references in old land surveys to the area being unworked, not because the timber was undesirable or the terrain impassable, but simply because no one had worked it. The surveyor's notes describe asking local farmers about it and receiving what he called evasive and superstitious responses. He seemed frustrated by this, as if the locals were being deliberately unhelpful. Reading those notes now, I don't think they were being evasive. I think they were telling him everything they knew, which was nothing. Or rather, which was only the feeling, and you cannot put a feeling into a land survey. There are also references in older Bavarian folklore to what are called Bannwälder, literally banned forests or forbidden forests. These were places that communities collectively agreed, often without formal designation, to leave alone. Sometimes there was a practical reason. Wood that had been set aside for the local lord, or an area with particularly dangerous terrain. But in many documented cases, the reason given was simply that the forest belonged to something else. Not a spirit necessarily, not the devil, just something else. Something that had been there longer and had a prior claim. Whether the Svachtik falls into this tradition, I cannot say with certainty, but it fits the pattern closely enough to be worth noting. There is one account that stands apart from everything else I've gathered. I'm going to be careful about how I share this because the person who told me asked me to remain anonymous, and I want to respect that. I call him Thomas, which is not his real name. Thomas grew up near the forest and left the area in his 20s to work in Munich. He came back in his early 40s to care for his aging parents. He told me he had grown up with the same quiet understanding that everyone else had, that the forest was simply not a place you went, but that, by the time he returned as an adult, he spent 20 years living in a city where everything had a rational explanation, and he had lost whatever instinct had kept him at a distance as a child. He said, "I didn't believe in it anymore. I thought it was just a local superstition. Old people being old people, you know." He went in on an October afternoon. Just a short walk, he told himself, just to see what the fuss was about. He described the first few minutes as completely normal. Ordinary forest, cold air, the sound of his own footsteps on dead leaves. He walked for what he estimated was about 10 minutes, following no particular path, because there was no path to follow. Then he stopped. He described it as a very sudden awareness that he had been walking for what felt like a very long time. Not 10 minutes, a long time. He couldn't say how long. He looked at his watch and the time didn't help him. He couldn't remember what time it had been when he entered. He said the light was wrong. Not dark exactly, but wrong. Flat and directionless, in a way that made it impossible to tell where the sun was. He couldn't orient himself. He turned around to walk back the way he'd come, and all directions looked equally possible. He said, "I wasn't frightened. That's the strange part. I was very calm. Almost calm like you get when something is very wrong and your body decides that panic won't help. That kind of calm." He walked for another period of time he couldn't estimate. And then he was at the tree line, back on the road. His car was visible 50 meters away. He said he still doesn't know which direction he walked to get out. He doesn't know how long he was inside. He sat in his car for a while before he drove home. He has not come back. When I asked him what he thought had happened, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think the forest let me leave. I don't think I found my way out. I think it decided I could go." He said this without drama, like a man reporting a weather observation. He seemed, if anything, faintly embarrassed by it. I don't know what das Waldstück is. I don't know what it was before the spruce trees grew there, or what the land was called before the villages existed, or whether there was ever a moment when a person first looked at the hillside and understood instinctively that it was not theirs to enter. I know that the avoidance had persisted across generations, across centuries perhaps, without a single dramatic event to anchor it. No body found, no monster sighted, no catastrophe recorded, just a collective, quiet, inexplicable agreement that some places belong to something else. I found it more unsettling than any ghost story. Ghost stories have edges. They have a beginning and an end. They happen to someone somewhere, and then they stopped happening. This is different. This is something that simply continues. Has always continued. Will continue after every alive today who knows about it is gone. The forest doesn't need us to believe in it. It was there before we arrived. It will be there after we leave. It has, as far as anyone can tell, always simply been there. Waiting or not waiting. Perhaps not even aware of us at all. Perhaps that's the worst part. My grandmother died when I was 19. I never asked her everything I wanted to ask. I thought about it a lot over the years, and the things I should have asked while I still could. But I've also thought about this. She warned me about the forest before she warned me about almost anything else, and she was not a woman who wasted words or worry on things that didn't matter. That tells me something. I don't know exactly what, but something.